The sun had barely crested the horizon when Cato the Younger strode into the forum, his face set in the grim determination that had become his trademark. Clad in a simple toga, a garment that spoke not of luxury, but of his unyielding discipline, he passed the bustling marketplace teeming with merchants and citizens alike, their voices rising and falling like the tide. Yet Cato's focus remained unbroken, his eyes piercing through the morning haze as he approached the Senate, where the day's deliberations would soon unfold. As the story is told, Cato often rose before dawn, eschewing the comforts of sleep for the rigors of the day ahead. This was not mere routine, it was a declaration of his principles, a testament to his belief in the importance of self-control. His mornings, spent in solitary reflection or rigorous physical training, were a crucible that tempered his spirit. Cato understood that to cultivate discipline was to harness one's will, to shape oneself into an instrument of virtue, ready to confront the trials of life with unwavering resolve. In an age marked by moral decay and rampant corruption, Cato's steadfastness stood in stark contrast. He was a man who embodied the Stoic ideal, not merely enduring the weight of existence, but mastering it. His very presence demanded discipline from those around him. While others succumbed to the allure of luxury and pleasure, Cato remained steadfast in his asceticism, believing that true strength lay not in indulgence, but in restraint. His ascetic lifestyle served as a mirror, reflecting a world that had become too comfortable, too willing to trade integrity for convenience. That day, as he entered the Senate chamber, the air thickened with tension. Cato's reputation as a fierce defender of the Republic was well known, yet it was not his fiery rhetoric that held sway over his peers, but rather the discipline that governed his life. He spoke less often than others, but when he did, his words carried the weight of his moral fortitude. He stood as a bulwark against tyranny, his unwavering stance a testament to the conviction that guided him. Cato's discipline was not an abstract concept, it was a lived experience, reflected in every aspect of his daily life. He rose early, trained his body, studied philosophy, and engaged in the affairs of state with a clarity of purpose that inspired those around him. The Stoic philosopher Seneca once remarked that, "The man who suffers before it is necessary, suffers more than is necessary," and Cato embodied this wisdom, anticipating the trials ahead and preparing himself to face them unfalteringly. Yet, there was a sadness in Cato's commitment to duty, for it often came at the expense of personal joy. His life was a testament to the conflict between the demands of the soul and the desires of the flesh. In his pursuit of virtue, he became both hero and martyr, embodying the struggle inherent in the human condition. Cato's legacy, forged through discipline and sacrifice, beckons us to examine our own lives. What are we willing to endure in the name of our principles, and how far are we willing to go to uphold what we believe to be right? To answer this question, we must first look to the man himself. Not the marble bust, not the legend, but the flesh and blood of Marcus Porcius Cato. He was born into the twilight of the Roman Republic, a world drowning in its own success. The city's arteries, once channels of military and civic virtue, were clogged with foreign gold, Eastern luxuries, and a moral apathy that masqueraded as sophistication. Senators, whose ancestors had farmed their own land, now measured their worth in the acreage of their villas and the exoticism of their feasts. It was an age of gilded rot, a cacophony of excess. And into this world walked Cato, a man deliberately, defiantly out of step. A specter of the old republic haunting its decadent descendant. Imagine the scene on the forum floor. The elite arrive in curtained litters, carried on the shoulders of slaves, their white togas edged with the proud purple of their station. They are perfumed, coiffed, their fingers heavy with rings. Then Cato appears. He has walked to the Senate house, often barefoot, through the filth and clamor of the city. He wears a simple, dark tunic, the color of mourning, for what he saw as the death of Roman liberty. He refused a toga altogether, scorning the symbol of a dignity he felt his peers no longer possessed. He was a living rebuke. This was not a performance of poverty. Cato was immensely wealthy. This was the practice of resilience. It was a physical manifestation of his Stoic philosophy, a daily training regimen for the soul. The Stoics called it ascesis, voluntary hardship. By enduring the heat of summer and the chill of winter, by drinking the sour wine of a common soldier while others drank the finest Falernian, by sleeping on the hard ground, he was hardening his character against a far greater threat, the temptation of corruption, the lure of convenience, the siren song of popular opinion. Each blister on his foot was a small victory over comfort. Each shivering night was a lesson in self-sufficiency. He believed a man who could not command his own appetites could never be trusted to command a legion or the treasury of the state. His discipline was not self-punishment, it was the forging of a weapon. He was conditioning his body to obey his mind, so that his mind could remain a steadfast servant of his principles. He knew that the softness of the feather bed and the sweetness of the spiced wine were the very things that made men soft and sweet to tyrants. And Cato, above all else, would not be soft. He was making himself into an instrument of iron, preparing for a war he saw coming long before the first sword was drawn. That war came. And it was lost. The legions of the Republic were broken on the plains of Thapsus, and the cause for which Cato had forged himself into a weapon lay in ruins. He and the last of the senators were cornered in the city of Utica, a final, flickering candle of defiance against the storm of Julius Caesar. And now, Caesar was marching on them. But he did not come only with swords. He came bearing a more insidious weapon, mercy. Caesar's famous clementia was not a kindness, it was a tool of political subjugation. To be pardoned by Caesar was to accept his authority, to acknowledge his mastery over the state and your own life. A pardon for Cato would be the final humiliation. It would make the unbending man bend. It would turn the walking embodiment of the Republic into a living monument to Caesar's supremacy, forced to walk the streets of a Rome he no longer recognized. The choice, then, was not between life and death. It was between a life of compromise and a death of integrity. For a man like Cato, this was no choice at all. This was the final exam for a life of study. He had disciplined his body against cold and comfort. He had disciplined his tongue against flattery and falsehood. Now, he would discipline his very soul against the animal instinct to survive. This is the bedrock of Stoic discipline. Virtue is the sole good. Life, health, freedom from pain, these are merely preferred indifferents. They are good to have, but they are not the good. And you must be willing to relinquish any of them, without hesitation, to protect the integrity of your character. To protect your virtue. On his final night, as the story is told by Plutarch, Cato dined with his friends and his son. He spoke not of fear or escape, but of philosophy, debating Stoic paradoxes as calmly as if he were in a lecture hall in Athens. Afterwards, in his chambers, he read Plato's dialogue on the immortality of the soul, the Phaedo. He was preparing his mind for what his hand was about to do. When the house was quiet, he took up his sword. His first thrust was not fatal. His servants and son rushed in, and a physician began to stitch the wound. But Cato would not be denied his final act of self-determination. He waited until he was alone again, and with a resolve that chills the blood, he tore open the physician's stitches, ripped his own wounds wider, and unspooled his life with his own hands. He refused to live in Caesar's world. He had disciplined himself for one purpose, to be a free man in a free republic. And when that world was gone, he executed the final precept of his philosophy: he would not be compromised. He would be free. To understand the end of his life, you must understand the principle that guided it. For Cato, this final act was not one of despair, but of discipline. It was the last logical step in a philosophy he had practiced every day of his adult life. The Stoics divided the world into two domains, that which is within our power, and that which is not. Within our power are our judgments, our responses, our character, our will. Outside our power is everything else, the actions of others, the turns of fortune, politics, reputation, wealth, and health. The disciplined man, the Stoic, wastes no energy on what he cannot control. He pours all of his effort into the perfection of what he can, his own soul. Cato could not control Pompey's incompetence, the Senate's corruption, or Caesar's ambition. He could not command the winds that scattered his ships or the fear that broke other men's nerve. But he could control absolutely his response to these things. He could choose integrity when others chose expediency. He could choose resolution when others chose surrender. And he could choose death when the only life offered to him was one of servitude. He would not receive a pardon from the man who had murdered the Republic, because to accept the pardon was to legitimize the murderer. This resolve was not born in the moment. It was forged over decades. Cato's famous eccentricities, walking barefoot in all weather, wearing the simple, dark tunic of a commoner, sleeping on the ground with his soldiers, enduring hunger and thirst without complaint, these were not acts of self-punishment. They were rehearsals. The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. It is the deliberate practice of hardship. By choosing to endure small, voluntary discomforts, you strip involuntary hardship of its power to terrorize you. You prove to yourself that you can withstand more than you think. Cato's entire life was training for the day when everything would be taken from him except his will. And so, the lesson from Cato's discipline is not to wait for the crisis. It is not to hope that your character will magically rise to the occasion. It is to seek voluntary hardship, now. Tonight. Do the thing you are putting off. Have the difficult, necessary conversation. Take the cold shower. Forgo the easy comfort. It is not about the discomfort itself. It is about the message you send to your own mind, *I am in command here. My will, not my appetites. My principles, not my fears, * you prove to yourself, in small ways, that your spirit is more durable than your comfort. You prepare for the storm not by praying for calm seas, but by building a stronger ship. And soon, the storm arrived. Not a squall, but a hurricane that would tear the world apart. The Roman Republic, sick for a century, was now in its death throes. The conflict was not merely of legions, but of philosophies, embodied by two men, Caesar and Cato. Caesar was the future, ambition, genius, popularity, and a pragmatism that saw principle as just another tool, to be used or discarded. He was the irresistible force. Cato was the past, an iron-willed devotion to the old ways, to the law, to a republic that now existed more in his mind than in the forum. He was the immovable object. As Caesar's power grew, Cato's discipline became his armor and his protest. He walked the streets of Rome barefoot and with his head uncovered, a deliberate rejection of luxury. After the Civil War began, Plutarch tells us he let his hair and beard grow long, and wore the dark tunic of mourning, not for a person, but for the Republic itself. Each act of self-denial was a public statement: you can have your power, your gold, your legions. I have my principles. They are enough. But they were not enough to win. This is where we misunderstand discipline. We see it as a transactional tool, a means to an end. We lift the weight to build the muscle. We study the book to pass the test. We endure the hardship to achieve the victory. And by that logic, Cato was a failure. His armies were shattered at the Battle of Thapsus. His cause was lost. His republic was a corpse, soon to be given a new name, empire. Here, in the ashes of defeat, is the turn. Here is the true lesson. Cato's discipline was never intended to defeat Caesar. It was intended to ensure that Caesar could not defeat Cato. The purpose of all that training, the cold, the hunger, the deliberate discomfort, was not to control the outcome of the world. It was to forge a self that the world could not break. Caesar could take his property. He could destroy his allies. He could end his life. But he could not make Cato bend. He could not force him to praise a tyrant, or to live as a pardoned subject in a kingdom built on the rubble of his ideals. In his final hours in the city of Utica, with Caesar's forces approaching, Cato did not despair. He dined with his philosophers, read Plato's dialogue on the immortality of the soul, and then retired to his room. The fortress he had spent a lifetime building was not made of stone, but of character. And in the final test, that fortress held. He proved that one thing, and one thing only, remained under his absolute command, his own will. The choice to live as a free man, or not to live at all. We are not Cato. We do not face the legions of a dictator at the gates of our city. The choices before us are not, for the most part, matters of life and death played out on a world stage. And so it can be tempting to dismiss his final, unflinching act as a relic of a harder time, a dramatic gesture with no relevance to our modern lives. But this is a profound mistake. It is to see only the earthquake, and not the immense, slow pressure that created the fault line. Cato's final defiance was not born in a single night of despair in Utica. It was the culmination of a lifetime of small, deliberate, and often uncomfortable acts of discipline. The forge of his character was not the battlefield, but the everyday. Plutarch tells us that Cato trained his body for hardship. He walked barefoot and bareheaded in all weather, heat and cold alike. He wore the dark, unfashionable toga of his ancestors when others wore bright colors. When he commanded legions, he marched on foot with his men, refusing a horse, sharing their meager rations and their long miles. He drank cheap wine, or often just water, when his station afforded him the finest vintages. This was not self-punishment for its own sake. It was rehearsal. Each time he chose the hard ground over a soft bed, each time he endured the sun on his head without complaint, he was casting a vote. He was strengthening the part of himself that could command, and weakening the part that could only complain. Each small refusal of comfort was a deposit into the account of his own will. He was teaching his body to obey his mind, so that when the ultimate test came, there would be no question as to which was master. So what is the lesson for us, here, in the quiet of our own lives? It is not to seek out a sword. It is to understand that the same war is fought on a smaller scale, every single day. Your Utica is the moment the alarm clock rings. It is the choice between the easy distraction of a screen and the hard focus of a book. It is the desire for one more drink, the lazy excuse to skip a workout, the temptation to tell a small, convenient lie. The lesson, then, is to begin your own training tonight. Not with a grand declaration, but with a small, private refusal. Choose one thing, one single, trivial comfort, and deny it. Take the cold shower. Put the phone in another room an hour before bed. Forgo the dessert you crave. It need not be monumental. It must only be deliberate. No one will see it. No one will applaud. It is a war fought against the lesser man inside you, in a theater no one else can enter. But in this quiet act, you are learning the grammar of your own will. You are proving, in the only way that matters, who is in command. And that victory, however small, is everything. But a victory of the mind demands a trial in the world of matter. An internal resolution must be forged in external fire, however small the flame. For the Stoics, philosophy was not a subject for debate, but a thing to be lived. A kind of training. The Romans had a word for this, disciplina. The Greeks, ascesis, from which we derive our word ascetic. It means exercise, practice, repetition. The great Stoic teacher Musonius Rufus, who taught in Rome during the reigns of Nero and Vespasian, was perhaps the most practical of them all. For Musonius, the soul was an athlete. It could not be expected to perform under the strain of real calamity if it had only ever known comfort in training. He argued that the man who has never been cold, or thirsty, or hungry by choice will utterly collapse when the world forces these conditions upon him. But the man who has practiced hardship, who has befriended it on his own terms, will meet misfortune not as a terrifying stranger, but as a familiar sparring partner. And so, here is the practice. A lesson from Musonius, fit for the modern world. It requires no special equipment. It costs nothing. You can perform it tonight. At your evening meal. The table is set. The food is before you. You are hungry, you are tired. Your appetite, an old and familiar tyrant, points to the choicest cut, the largest portion, the fullest glass. It whispers its simple, animal logic, more, better, now. Tonight, deny him. Deliberately pass over the best portion and take the lesser one. Take a little less than you desire. If there is water and wine, choose the water. Do this quietly. This is not a performance for others, it is a command issued to yourself. This is not a diet. It has nothing to do with health, and everything to do with sovereignty. In that small, silent refusal, you are redrawing a line. You are reminding your body, that demanding animal, that its appetites are subject to review. You are breaking the simple, reflexive chain of desire and gratification. This was the logic of Cato's bare feet on the stones of the Forum. By choosing discomfort when comfort was an option, he was teaching himself that he could endure its arrival when it was not. You are practicing poverty so that actual poverty will hold no terror. You are rehearsing for thirst, so that real thirst will not break your will. This is not punishment. It is forging. With this simple act of denial, you are not starving yourself. You are feeding the part of you that matters. You are teaching your body the iron truth it has forgotten, that it is the servant, not the master. And that you are free. This freedom, once tasted, is a demanding thing. It is not a freedom from hardship, but the freedom to face it. It is not the liberty to do as you please, but the sovereignty to do as you must. For Cato, this lifelong rehearsal of denial, this relentless honing of his will against the soft comforts of the world, was not an end in itself. It was practice. It was the slow, deliberate forging of a tool for a task he prayed would never come. But it did come. It came in the North African city of Utica, with the ruin of the republic an established fact and the clemency of a dictator the only path left to him. Caesar had won. To bend the knee was to live. To accept a pardon was to admit that Caesar had the authority to grant one, that Cato's life was a gift to be given by a tyrant. For the man who had made his body a servant to his principles, this was an inversion of the highest order. His life was his own. His soul, unconquered. And so, in his final hours, he did not weep or rage. He read Plato's dialogue on the immortality of the soul, twice. He ensured the safe passage of his companions. He held his principles in his hand as firmly as he held the sword he then drove into his own gut. As the story is told, his attendants rushed in and a physician stitched the wound closed while Cato was unconscious. But when he awoke, his purpose was undiminished. He did not speak. With an act of will that beggars belief, he tore the stitches open with his bare hands, ripped his own wounds apart, and so ensured his end. This was not an act of passion. It was an act of logic. A final, gruesome, and absolute expression of the discipline he had practiced his entire life. The cold stone floor, the rough tunic, the meager meal, they were all lessons in a single, unyielding truth: the body does not give the soul its orders. You and I will likely never face a Caesar at the gates. Our Utica will be a quieter room. It may be a diagnosis from a doctor, a betrayal by a friend, or simply the slow, inevitable dimming of our own strength. We do not get to choose the circumstance of our end. But the discipline we build today, in the cold showers, the early mornings, the difficult conversations, this is the forge. In it, we are shaping the person who will meet that end. We are all mortal. Our time is a finite line. But our character is the one thing that can be made indestructible. It is the one thing that no tyrant, no turn of fate, no specter of death can ever truly take from you. It is the only thing you will truly own when everything else is gone. And it is built not in a single, glorious moment, but in the 1,000 small choices you make, starting tonight. It is the marble of your soul, and your will is the chisel.